In the heart of Manhattan's most exclusive hotel, CEO Emily Carter stood at the center of a glittering celebration. The chandeliers above cast prismatic light across her champagne flute as investors congratulated her on closing a billion-dollar merger. Then came the sound, not the pop of another cork, but something sharper, more final. Glass shattered. Someone screamed. Emily turned to see a figure in a waiter's uniform lunging toward her, blade gleaming. She froze, her mind unable to process the impossibility of violence in this gilded sanctuary. Then a hand gripped her arm and pulled her backward with brutal efficiency. The knife whistled past her ribs, close enough that she felt the displacement of air. Her rescuer moved like water fluid, inevitable. In 3 economical movements, the attacker crumpled to the marble floor. Emily looked up at her savior. Dark eyes, expensive suit stretched across broad shoulders, and a face she'd seen exactly once before in an FBI briefing about organized crime in New York, Vince Marino. The man federal prosecutors had been trying to convict for a decade. He bent down, retrieved something from the unconscious assailant's pocket, and pressed it into her palm, a photograph of her, with a red X drawn across her face. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice carrying the rough warmth of aged whiskey, "we need to talk about the people who want us both dead." Emily Carter had built her empire on precision. At 32, she'd transformed a struggling cybersecurity startup into Titan Shield Technologies, a company now valued at $3 billion. Her corner office on the 47th floor of the Lexington Tower overlooked Central Park, but she rarely took time to appreciate the view. There was always another contract to negotiate, another competitor to outmaneuver, another board meeting where old men tested whether she truly belonged at the head of the table. She'd earned her reputation through late nights and early mornings, through saying no to everything that wasn't growth, profit, or market dominance. Her assistant, Rebecca Morrison, maintained Emily's calendar with military precision. 7 a.m. strategy sessions, back-to-back investor calls, working lunches where she barely tasted her food. The only constants in Emily's life were her morning espresso, her evening reports, and the persistent loneliness that settled over her apartment each night like fog. Her personal life existed in fragments: a college roommate she texted twice a year, a sister in Portland with 3 kids whose names Emily sometimes mixed up, parents in Ohio who'd stopped asking when she'd visit. She dated Daniel Pierce, her VP of operations, for 2 years before the relationship dissolved in a mutual recognition that neither had time for the other. They'd remained professional, perhaps too professional, speaking only of quarterly projections and market analysis. But lately, something had shifted in the atmosphere at Titan Shield. Small things at first: a misplaced file, a meeting moved without her approval, encrypted messages arriving at her personal email address from unknown senders. The messages were simple, almost banal. "Careful who you trust. Check the overseas accounts. They're watching." Emily had forwarded them to her head of security, Marcus Chen, a former Secret Service agent she'd hired specifically because he didn't tolerate paranoia or conspiracy theories. Marcus had traced the emails to routing servers in Prague, Singapore, and São Paulo, professionally obscured, impossible to track further. He'd recommended enhanced security protocols. Emily had agreed, though she'd considered it an overabundance of caution. 3 weeks before the attack, she'd received a different kind of message. A single line: "The merger will kill you." She'd assumed it was metaphorical, a warning about market volatility or shareholder revolt. She'd been negotiating to acquire a European data firm called SecureNet International, a deal that would expand Titan Shield's global footprint overnight. The European company's CEO, Klaus Reinhardt, had been cooperative, almost eager. The only complication had come from an unexpected bidder, a venture capital firm called Apex Holdings, that had appeared from nowhere with deep pockets and aggressive offers. Emily had won, of course. She always won. The celebration party had been Rebecca's idea, a way to demonstrate strength to the investment community. Emily had reluctantly agreed to 2 hours of champagne and small talk at the plaza's grand ballroom. She'd worn her favorite black dress, the one that said success without saying anything else, and prepared herself for an evening of handshakes and hollow compliments. The knife had come for her during the CEO's traditional toast, when all eyes should have been on her face, when security should have been watching the crowd. Instead, chaos. Vince Marino's hand on her arm, the impossible efficiency of his violence. And now, sitting in the back of his car as it cut through Manhattan's late-night traffic, Emily realized that everything she'd built, every carefully constructed wall, every calculated risk, every sleepless night had been built on ground that was far less solid than she'd believed. Vince's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building in Tribeca that didn't advertise its existence. No doorman, no lobby directory, just a steel door and a biometric scanner. Emily's head still rang from the adrenaline crash, and she'd lost her shoes somewhere between the ballroom and his car. The marble floor was cold against her bare feet. "Sit," Vince said, gesturing to a leather sofa that probably cost more than her first car. The apartment was austere, expensive, but minimal, like a very wealthy person's idea of a monastery. No photographs, no personal touches, just clean lines and carefully curated emptiness. Emily remained standing. "I could have called the police." "You could have." He shrugged out of his jacket, revealing shoulder holsters she'd been too shocked to notice before. "But you didn't. You saved my life. I saved both our lives." He walked to a bar cart and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into crystal tumblers. "The man who attacked you wasn't there for the thrill. He was a professional. Croatian ex-military. Works for the highest bidder. Someone paid at least $200,000 for tonight's performance." Emily's stomach turned. "How do you know that?" "Because I know the market rate for murder." Vince handed her a glass. She didn't drink. "And because I've had someone watching you for 6 weeks." The admission should have terrified her. Instead, Emily felt a strange calm settling over her shock, the same cold clarity that had helped her navigate hostile boardrooms and corporate warfare. Why? Because 6 weeks ago, a very dangerous man named Anton Volkov asked me to deliver a message to you. He wanted you to stop the SecureNet acquisition. I declined. Volkov doesn't handle rejection well. Vince took a measured sip. When I refused, he made it clear that both of us had become inconvenient. "I don't understand." Emily finally sat, her legs suddenly unreliable. "I've never heard of Anton Volkov. I run a cybersecurity company, not a criminal enterprise. SecureNet International isn't what you think it is." Vince set his glass down with careful precision. "On paper, it's a legitimate data security firm. In reality, about 40% of its infrastructure is used to move money for organizations like mine, and like Volkov's. Your acquisition would have given you access to financial records that could destroy a dozen criminal networks across 3 continents." Emily's mind raced through the due diligence reports, the financial audits, the legal reviews. "That's impossible. We examined everything." "You examined what Klaus Reinhardt wanted you to see. He's been skimming from Volkov for 2 years, hiding assets, preparing to disappear. Your merger was his exit strategy. He'd sell to you, pocket legitimate money, and vanish before Volkov realized how much was missing. You'd own a company riddled with illegal operations you knew nothing about. When federal investigators came knocking, and you'd take the fall for laundering billions." The photograph in Emily's hand suddenly made terrible sense. Not just a threat, but a death sentence disguised as a warning. "And you? Why does Volkov want you dead?" "Because I refused to help him." Vince's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, not quite regret, but a weariness that suggested he'd made this kind of choice before. "My organization has rules. We don't target civilians. We don't use legitimate businesses as fronts without the owner's knowledge. Volkov wanted me to force you to cancel the deal. When I said no, I became a liability. A romantic, in his words. Too sentimental for the modern world." Emily stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, the city continued its endless motion, oblivious to the violence that had just reshaped her understanding of reality. "So what now? I'm supposed to trust the mob boss who's been stalking me?" "No," Vince said quietly. "You're supposed to recognize that we're both standing in the same fire. You can try to walk out alone, and Volkov will kill you within 48 hours. Or you can work with me, and maybe we both survive long enough to put out the flames." Emily studied his reflection in the glass. He'd saved her life without hesitation, moved with a competence that suggested violence was as natural to him as spreadsheets were to her. But there was something else in his posture, a controlled tension that reminded her of people she'd known in the military. Her uncle, her college boyfriend who'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan. People who'd seen too much but refused to break. "I need proof," she said. "About SecureNet, about Volkov, about everything you just told me." "Fair enough." Vince pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. "I'm sending you files now. Financial records, communications, photographs of SecureNet's actual server locations. Read them." Then decide if you want to keep building your empire on quicksand, or if you want to tear it down and start clean. Emily's phone buzzed. She opened the first file and felt her stomach drop. Transaction records showing millions moving through Titan Shield's new subsidiary. Encrypted messages between Klaus Reinhardt and someone identified only as K.V. Konstantin Volkov, Anton's younger brother. Photographs of SecureNet's Prague office, where she'd planned to visit next month, revealing server farms that bore no resemblance to the specs in her acquisition documents. "This could ruin me," she whispered. "Only if you let it." Vince walked to stand beside her at the window. "Or you could be the CEO who discovered the fraud, reported it to federal authorities, and helped dismantle an international money laundering operation. The hero who cleaned up the industry instead of the criminal who profited from it. And you? I have my own problems to solve. But they're easier to solve if Volkov is too busy defending himself to come after me." He glanced at her. "We don't have to be friends, Miss Carter. We just have to be allies long enough to survive." Emily looked at the files on her phone, at the evidence of betrayal and deception woven through the deal she'd fought so hard to close. Then she looked at Vince Marino, the criminal who'd saved her life, and made a calculation that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "Tell me what we need to do." The next morning, Emily called in sick for the first time in 3 years. Rebecca sounded genuinely alarmed, offering to bring soup and reschedule the entire week. Emily declined, claiming food poisoning, and spent the day in Vince's penthouse reading through documents that rewrote everything she thought she knew about her company. Vince worked at a desk near the window, speaking in low tones on encrypted calls in languages Emily didn't recognize: Russian, Italian, what might have been Albanian. He moved through his criminal empire with the same efficiency she applied to quarterly earnings reports. There was something almost beautiful about it, in a horrifying way. By evening, Emily had compiled a list of questions. Klaus Reinhardt has a wife, 2 children, a house in Geneva. How does a family man become a criminal's puppet? Slowly, then all at once, Vince closed his laptop. 15 years ago, Klaus needed capital to expand. Traditional banks turned him down. Volkov offered better terms, no questions asked. By the time Klaus realized the money came with strings attached, those strings had become chains. "And my VP of Operations? Daniel Pierce?" His name appears in some of these communications. Vince's expression darkened. "We need to talk about Mr. Pierce." They moved to the dining table, where Vince spread out surveillance photographs like a dealer arranging cards. Daniel at a restaurant with Klaus Reinhardt. Daniel entering a brownstone Emily didn't recognize. Daniel shaking hands with a man Vince identified as Konstantin Volkov. "Daniel's been feeding information to Volkov for 18 months, Vince said. "Not because he's inherently corrupt, but because they have leverage." 3 years ago, Daniel had a gambling problem. Poker, mostly. He got in debt to the wrong people who happened to work for Volkov. Instead of breaking his legs, they offered him a deal. Insider information in exchange for debt forgiveness. Emily felt sick. She'd worked beside Daniel for 4 years, dated him for 2, trusted him with her company's most sensitive operations. What kind of information? Everything. Your negotiation strategies, your financial thresholds, your personal schedule. When you ignored the anonymous warnings about the merger, Daniel told Volkov. That's when Volkov decided more direct action was necessary. The attack at the plaza, Daniel knew I'd be there. He helped plan your security detail. Vince's voice was clinical, presenting facts without judgment. He suggested the plaza specifically because its security protocols have known vulnerabilities. He arranged for Marcus Chen to be called away during the toast, creating a window for the attack. Emily's hands curled into fists. The betrayal cut deeper than the business implications. Daniel had smiled at her that evening, wished her congratulations, stood beside her while someone prepared to drive a knife into her heart. "I want him arrested," she said. "Not yet." Vince held up a hand. "If you move against Daniel now, Volkov will know we're on to him. He'll disappear, restructure, and come at us from a different angle. We need Daniel in place, feeding false information, buying us time to prepare. Prepare for what? For war." Vince's smile was cold and precise. Volkov operates from Brighton Beach, but his network extends across the Northeast. He has politicians in his pocket, judges on his payroll, legitimate businesses that provide cover. Taking him down requires more than evidence it requires, dismantling his entire support structure. Emily thought of her company, her reputation. The life she'd built on assumptions that now seemed painfully naive. I'm a CEO, not a soldier. I negotiate contracts, not battles. Then think of this as the most important negotiation of your life. Vince leaned forward. Volkov's strength comes from his ability to hide in plain sight. But you have something he doesn't: legitimate access to the financial systems he depends on. You can see the money trails, track the payments, identify the shell companies. With your expertise and my connections, we can expose him in ways law enforcement never could. And then what? I hand everything to the FBI and hope they protect me? Then we make sure Volkov is too busy defending himself to come after us. Vince pulled out a different phone, one Emily hadn't seen before. I have friends in federal law enforcement. Not people on Volkov's payroll, but actual agents who've been trying to build cases against him for years. Give them what they need, and they'll give you protection. Emily walked to the window again, watching the sun set over the Hudson River. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably at his own apartment, believing he'd successfully infiltrated her company, unaware that his betrayal had been discovered. Klaus Reinhardt was likely planning his escape, and Anton Volkov was orchestrating violence from whatever fortress he called home. She'd built Titan Shield on calculated risks, on her ability to see 3 moves ahead, to anticipate competitors and outmaneuver them. This was just another board, another game, except the pieces were lives instead of market shares. If I do this, Emily said slowly, I need guarantees. Protection for my employees, immunity from prosecution, for unknowingly facilitating Volkov's operations, and a clear exit strategy. I can't guarantee anything except that doing nothing guarantees your death. Vince stood beside her. But I can promise that I'll use every resource I have to keep you alive. Not because I'm a good person, I'm not. But because you're valuable, and I protect valuable things. It wasn't reassuring, but it was honest. Emily respected honesty, even brutal honesty, more than comfortable lies. Where do we start? They started with Daniel. Emily returned to work the next day, moving through her office with the same controlled precision she'd cultivated over years of hostile negotiations. She smiled at Daniel when he asked about her recovery, accepted his concern with graceful lies, and invited him to a private meeting to discuss the SecureNet integration. In her office, with the door closed and the city sprawling below them, Emily laid out a fabricated plan. I'm concerned about the European regulatory environment, she said, pulling up documents Vince had helped her create overnight. I want to restructure the acquisition, separate the European operations into a subsidiary that can't touch our domestic infrastructure. Daniel nodded, his expression carefully neutral. That's conservative. Some board members might see it as weakening the merger's value. Let them question it. I'd rather be conservative than exposed. Emily slid a folder across her desk. I need you to coordinate with Klaus, get his team's feedback on the restructuring. Present it as a routine compliance measure. Of course. Daniel took the folder, and Emily watched his eyes track across the pages, memorizing details he'd report to Volkov within hours. When do you want the analysis? End of week. Emily kept her voice level, betraying none of the fury simmering beneath her professional mask. This stays between us until I'm ready to present to the board. I don't want premature speculation affecting our stock price. Understood. Daniel stood, and for just a moment, Emily saw something flicker across his face. Guilt, perhaps, or anxiety. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual confident smile. I'll handle it personally. When he left, Emily allowed herself 30 seconds to feel the betrayal fully, to acknowledge the pain of trust shattered. Then she opened her laptop and sent an encrypted message to Vince. The bait is set. That evening, she met Vince at a warehouse in Red Hook. The space was cavernous, filled with shipping containers and industrial equipment that suggested legitimate business operations. But when Vince led her to a back office, Emily found herself in a room that looked more like a military command center computers. Monitors displaying security feeds, maps marked with locations and routes. This is where we coordinate logistics, Vince explained. Legitimate logistics, mostly. My organization handles cargo shipping, warehousing, transportation. 90% of it is legal. The other 10% funds operations like this one. Emily studied the maps. You're showing me all this because? Because you need to understand what you're working with. I'm not a movie villain, Miss Carter. I'm a businessman who operates in gray spaces. The violence, the enforcement, that's management, not pleasure. I keep my people safe, maintain our territory, and try to avoid the kind of psychotic behavior that makes men like Volkov. You've still killed people. Yes. No hesitation, no justification. And if Volkov comes for us directly, I'll kill again. But I won't lie to you about what that means. Every choice has a cost. You need to decide if you can live with those costs. Emily thought about her company, about the employees who depended on her leadership, about the life she'd built that was now balanced on a knife's edge. What did Daniel tell Volkov? Vince pulled up an intercepted message on one of the monitors. He reported your restructuring plan verbatim. Volkov's response was interesting. He's telling Klaus to encourage the separation, to make it seem like a good idea. He wants Titan Shield's domestic operations clean when the European subsidiary collapses. So he's planning to let the European operation take the fall, keep laundering money through other channels. Emily leaned closer to the screen. He's adaptable. That makes him more dangerous, but also more predictable. Adaptable people follow patterns. They just adjust variables. Vince zoomed in on communication logs. Volkov moves money through a network of shell companies, using legitimate businesses as transfer points. Every month, funds flow through a predictable sequence: real estate, import-export, cryptocurrency exchanges, then into secured accounts. The pattern is consistent. We can use that. Emily's mind shifted into the analytical mode she used for complex financial models. If we can identify the shell companies, we can trace the beneficial owners. And if we can map the entire network before moving, we can cut off multiple branches simultaneously. Exactly. But we need time, which means keeping Volkov convinced that he's controlling the situation. Vince pulled up another screen showing real-time stock prices. Your company's stock dropped 2% today. Market analysts are calling it a correction after the merger announcement. But if we're right about Volkov's plans, he'll want that stock to drop further. Instability makes acquisition targets cheaper. He's going to attack Titan Shield's value. Emily felt her strategic instincts engage, the same competitive drive that had built her empire. Negative press, maybe leaked concerns about the merger, rumors about financial irregularities, all designed to panic investors and weaken my position. Can you counter it? I can do better than counter it. I can use it. Emily pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly. If Volkov wants to manipulate my stock price, he'll need to create credible threats. That means generating documentation, planting stories, coordinating with short sellers. Every action creates evidence. If we're watching for it, we can turn his attack into proof of market manipulation. Vince smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually severe features. You really are as smart as they say. I'm alive because I'm smart. Emily looked up from her phone. And I intend to stay that way. Now show me everything you have on Volkov's financial network. It's time to build a case that will bury him. Over the next 2 weeks, Emily lived 2 lives. By day, she was the driven CEO, managing Titan Shield through integration challenges while preparing defensive strategies for the board. By night, she worked alongside Vince in the Red Hook warehouse, mapping Volkov's criminal network with the same intensity she once applied to market analysis. The pattern emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in solution. Volkov's operations were elegantly simple: money entered his network through legitimate businesses, moved through carefully structured transactions that appeared legal on the surface, then emerged clean and untraceable. The SecureNet acquisition had been meant to expand his capabilities, giving him control over the digital infrastructure that would process millions in transactions. But Emily found the cracks. A warehouse in Newark registered to a company that shared board members with 3 other logistics firms. A cryptocurrency exchange in Miami, whose transaction volumes spiked on the same day each month. A real estate holding company in Boston that purchased properties exclusively from sellers connected to Volkov's network. He's not just laundering money, Emily said one night, staring at the conspiracy wall they'd built across an entire warehouse section. He's creating a closed loop. Every business feeds into the next, each one taking a small percentage, each one looking legitimate in isolation. But together, it's a machine. Vince stood beside her, studying the connections they'd documented. And like any machine, if we remove the right components, the whole thing stops working. Emily's phone buzzed. A message from Marcus Chen, her head of security. Need to speak with you privately. Tonight. Urgent. She showed Vince the message. Marcus doesn't use urgent lightly. Could be Volkov's people got to him, or Marcus found something. Emily trusted her instincts about people, and Marcus had never given her reason to doubt him. I should meet with him. Not alone. Vince was already reaching for his coat. If it's a trap, you need backup. They met Marcus at a diner in Queens, a place generic enough to be invisible. Marcus arrived alone, his usually composed expression tight with tension. He slid into the booth across from Emily, glanced at Vince with recognition and wariness, then pushed a manila envelope across the table. "I did background checks on everyone involved in the SecureNet merger," Marcus said quietly. "Something you asked me to do 3 months ago, but I dug deeper this time. Found connections I missed the first round." Emily opened the envelope. Inside were personnel files, financial records, and surveillance photographs. Her stomach dropped when she recognized the face in the first photo. Rebecca, her assistant. The woman who knew her schedule, her passwords, her every appointment and preference. "No," Emily whispered. "She's Klaus Reinhardt's niece," Marcus said. "Changed her name legally 5 years ago, buried the family connection under layers of paperwork. She's been feeding Reinhardt information since before you even announced the SecureNet acquisition. She's how they knew exactly when to strike, how to position Daniel, how to make everything look coincidental." Emily felt the world tilt. Rebecca had been with her for 18 months, anticipating her needs, managing her chaos, becoming something close to a friend in the limited way Emily allowed friendship. Every morning coffee, every late-night filing, every sympathetic smile, all of it calculated, all of it a lie. Where is she now? Emily's voice came out flat, emotionless. "At your apartment. She has the security codes, remember? You gave them to her last year when you needed someone to receive deliveries." Vince's hand moved beneath the table, probably checking a weapon. She could be planting surveillance equipment, searching for documents, or preparing another attack. "We need to go there now." Emily started to slide out of the booth, but Marcus stopped her. "No. You go there, she'll know something's wrong. She's expecting you to be at the office until at least 9 p.m. That's the schedule she keeps for you." Marcus pulled out another folder. "I've been watching her for 3 days, since I found the connection. She's methodical. Every evening she goes to your apartment, spends 45 minutes doing something I haven't been able to get eyes inside, then leaves. She's done it 8 times in the last 2 weeks. Planting something," Vince said. "Cameras, listening devices, or worse. If Volkov wants leverage, having surveillance in your home gives him intimate knowledge of your life." Emily thought about every private conversation she'd had in her apartment, every vulnerable moment she'd believed was hers alone. The violation felt physical, a nausea that rose from her core. "Can we catch her in the act?" Emily asked Marcus. "Better. We can let her think she's succeeding while we document everything she does. Then we add her testimony to your evidence against Volkov." Marcus looked at Vince. "But it requires resources I don't have. Your kind of resources." Vince nodded slowly. "I can have a team there in 30 minutes. Full surveillance. No intervention, unless she poses an immediate threat. We'll see exactly what she's doing, collect evidence, and use it to flip her against Volkov." "She won't flip," Emily said with certainty. "Family loyalty goes deeper than fear. Then we don't need her cooperation." Vince pulled out his phone. "We just need her recorded actions. If she's planting surveillance, that's multiple felonies. If she's accessing your files, that's corporate espionage. Either way, she becomes a liability to Volkov, not an asset. And liabilities can be leveraged." They coordinated in the diner's parking lot, Vince speaking rapid instructions to people Emily couldn't see. Within 40 minutes, he confirmed that his team was inside Emily's apartment building, positioned to observe without being detected. They'd hacked the building's security cameras, inserted their own monitoring equipment, and created a real-time feed that Vince pulled up on a tablet. Emily watched her own living room appear on the screen, the space she'd carefully decorated to be her sanctuary now violated by strangers' eyes. But when Rebecca appeared, moving through the apartment with practiced familiarity, Emily's sympathy evaporated. Rebecca wasn't planting cameras. She was replacing them. Old devices removed, new ones installed in the smoke detector, behind the television, inside a decorative bookend Emily had owned for years. Each movement was efficient, professional. This wasn't Rebecca's first surveillance operation. "She's been watching you for months," Marcus said quietly. "Probably since before you even announced plans to acquire SecureNet. This was never about business intelligence. This was about total control of your life." Emily watched Rebecca adjust a camera hidden in the air vent, angling it to capture the dining table where Emily often worked late at night. "How many devices?" I'm counting 7 so far, Vince said. Audio and visual. Expensive equipment, military grade. Volkov spared no expense. Can you trace where the feeds are going? Already on it. Vince typed commands on a laptop one of his team members had provided. The devices transmit to a secure server, located in a building in Brighton Beach. Volkov's watching you live, probably has been for months. He knows your routines, your habits, your vulnerabilities. Emily felt exposed in a way that went beyond physical danger. Volkov had seen her cry after exhausting days, had watched her talk to herself while reviewing presentations, had observed her at her most private and unguarded. He'd turned her sanctuary into a fishbowl. We can use this, Emily said, her mind shifting from victim to strategist. If Volkov thinks he's watching me, we can feed him false information. Make him believe he's still in control while we build our case. That's risky, Marcus warned. Any mistake, any inconsistency, and he'll know you're onto him. I've been performing for investors and board members my entire career. Emily's voice hardened. I can perform for Volkov. And when we're ready, when we have everything we need, we'll show him exactly what happens when you underestimate Emily Carter. Vince looked at her with something that might have been respect, or might have been recognition, the acknowledgement of finding a kindred spirit in an unexpected place. Then let's give him a show he'll never forget. Playing a role in her own apartment proved more difficult than Emily anticipated. Every evening she returned home knowing Volkov was watching, analyzing her expressions, her movements, her smallest gestures. She rehearsed normalcy reading in her usual chair, making tea at her usual time, even staging phone calls with fictional friends to maintain the illusion of an unchanged life. But the strain was accumulating. At Titan Shield, she navigated an increasingly complex web of deception. Daniel received carefully calibrated misinformation about the SecureNet integration. The board pressed her on declining stock prices just as Vince had predicted. Negative rumors about the merger had begun circulating through financial media, and Klaus Reinhardt grew more demanding, insisting on calls and meetings to address concerns that Emily knew were really attempts to extract information for Volkov. 3 weeks into the surveillance operation, Emily made her first mistake. She was working at her dining table, reviewing documents Vince had sent about Volkov's shell companies, when her phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. In her exhaustion, she answered without thinking. Emily, we need to talk about the Leipzig servers, Daniel said. Klaus is saying they're showing unusual activity. Emily's mind went blank for a crucial second. There were no Leipzig servers, they'd never discussed Leipzig at all. This was a test, Daniel checking if she knew something she shouldn't, probably at Volkov's instruction. I'll have to check with Klaus directly, she said carefully. Can you send me his latest report? Already emailed it. Daniel's voice carried an edge she'd never noticed before, or maybe had trained herself not to hear. But Emily, if there's something you're not telling me about the merger, about the restructuring I need to know, we're partners in this. Partners. The word twisted in her stomach. I'll review the report and get back to you tomorrow. She ended the call and immediately texted Vince. Compromised. Daniel's testing me. His response came within seconds. Stay calm. Don't deviate from your normal routine. I'm coming to you. But Emily couldn't stay calm. She paced her apartment, knowing Volkov was watching her agitation, knowing that every nervous gesture was being analyzed and catalogued. When Vince arrived an hour later entering through the service entrance his team had identified as having a blind spot in Rebecca's surveillance, Emily was barely holding herself together. He knows, she said. Or he suspects. Either way, we're running out of time. Then we accelerate. Vince moved with deliberate calm, staying in the surveillance blind spots his team had mapped. The FBI contact I mentioned, Agent Sarah Patterson, she's ready to move. We give her everything we have, coordinate a simultaneous raid on Volkov's properties, and disappear you into protective custody before anyone can react. And you? I have my own exit strategies. Vince's expression was unreadable. This isn't my first war, Emily. I know how to survive them. That's not what I asked. Emily stood close enough to speak in whispers that the surveillance wouldn't capture. You saved my life. Multiple times now. You've risked your organization, your freedom, your life. Why? Vince was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face as if memorizing its contours. Because Volkov represents everything I've tried not to become. Because you didn't deserve to be collateral damage in his ambitions. And because he stopped himself, shook his head. It doesn't matter. What matters is getting you somewhere safe. You were going to say something else. I was going to say something stupid. He pulled out his phone, checking messages. Patterson can take you into custody tomorrow morning. We'll stage it as a voluntary interview. Make it look like you're cooperating with a routine investigation. By the time Volkov realizes what's happening, you'll be beyond his reach. Emily thought about disappearing, about abandoning Titan Shield and everything she'd built, about living in protective custody while strangers dismantled the company she'd spent years creating. No, this isn't negotiable. You're right, it's not. Because I'm not running. Emily's voice was steel. I built Titan Shield from nothing. I'm not letting Volkov or anyone else take it from me. We move against him directly, publicly, with enough force that he can't retaliate without exposing himself further. That's suicide. It's strategy. Emily pulled up files on her laptop, displaying the network map they'd created. Look at this. Volkov's entire operation depends on staying invisible. The moment we force him into the light, his legitimate partners will scatter. Politicians can't afford association with a known criminal. Businesses can't risk their reputations. His protection evaporates, and he becomes desperate. Desperate criminals do desperate things. Let him try. Emily's fear had transformed into something sharper, more focused. We have evidence of money laundering, racketeering, attempted murder, corporate espionage. We have testimony from Marcus about Rebecca's surveillance operation. We have Daniel's communications with Volkov's people. And we have the knowledge that Volkov has been watching me, which means we can control what he thinks he knows. Vince studied her with an intensity that made Emily's breath catch. You've changed. 3 weeks ago you were terrified. Now you're planning to go to war with one of the most dangerous men on the East Coast. 3 weeks ago, I thought my biggest problem was quarterly earnings. Now I know what real threats look like. She met his gaze steadily, and I know that running doesn't end them. It just postpones the inevitable confrontation. I'd rather face it on my terms. Your terms could get you killed. Your terms guarantee I spend the rest of my life in hiding. Emily softened her voice. Vince, you've shown me your world, the violence, the complexity, the impossible choices. Let me show you mine. In my world, you win by being bolder than your opponents, by making moves they can't anticipate, by turning their strengths into weaknesses. Volkov thinks he knows me because he's been watching me. That's his weakness. We make him believe he knows what I'll do. Then we do something completely different. Vince's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. Volkov just moved a significant amount of money. The pattern suggests he's preparing for something major, either a planned expansion or a defensive consolidation. Or he's moving assets before we can freeze them. Emily's mind raced through possibilities. If he suspects we're building a case, he'll try to hide his money and eliminate evidence. We need to strike before he finishes repositioning. Agreed. But that means moving tomorrow, not next week. Then we move tomorrow. Emily pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd been saving. Agent Patterson? This is Emily Carter. I have information about an international money laundering operation, and I'm ready to provide evidence. But I need you to move fast, and I need you to listen to everything I'm about to tell you, no matter how impossible it sounds. Agent Sarah Patterson arrived at Titan Shield's headquarters at 6 a.m., accompanied by 2 other agents and a prosecutor from the Southern District of New York. They set up in Emily's private conference room, the one without windows, where her board typically reviewed confidential acquisitions. Emily had swept it for surveillance devices 3 times, using equipment Vince's team provided. For 6 hours, Emily walked them through everything: the SecureNet acquisition, Klaus Reinhardt's connections to Volkov, Daniel Pierce's betrayal, Rebecca Morrison's surveillance operation, Vince's role as reluctant ally rather than co-conspirator. She provided documents, financial records, intercepted communications, photographs, and recordings. Patterson, a woman in her early 40s with silver threading through her dark hair, listened with the intense focus of someone who'd spent years building cases that others called impossible. When Emily finished, Patterson leaned back in her chair and released a long breath. This is either the most elaborate fiction I've ever heard, Patterson said, or the most significant case against organized crime we've seen in a decade. The problem is corroboration. Most of your evidence comes from sources that won't testify in court. I'll testify, Emily said. About everything. The attack at the plaza, the surveillance in my apartment, the financial records I've analyzed. And Vince Marino is willing to provide information in exchange for immunity on unrelated charges. Emily slid another folder across the table Vince's offer, negotiated with his own attorneys over the past week. He's not testifying against his organization's operations, but he's providing intelligence on Volkov that your agency couldn't obtain any other way. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man named James Reeves, paged through Vince's offer. This is substantial. Locations, personnel, financial structures. If even half of this is accurate, it's worth the immunity deal. All of it is accurate, Emily said. Vince has no reason to lie. Volkov tried to kill both of us. This is survival, not altruism. Patterson stood and walked to the window overlooking Manhattan. If we move on this, we're committing significant resources. Multiple simultaneous raids, asset freezes, arrests coordinated across 3 states. If we're wrong, or if Volkov's connected enough to shut us down politically, it ends careers. Mine included. And if you don't move, Emily countered, Volkov continues operating with impunity. He'll find another legitimate business to corrupt, another CEO to manipulate or kill. This is your chance to cut out a cancer that's been growing in plain sight for 20 years. Patterson turned from the window. I need to brief my superiors. But if, and this is a significant if we proceed, you understand that you're exposing yourself to considerable danger? Even in custody, Volkov has reach. He's eliminated witnesses before. I understand. Emily thought of Vince's warning about desperate criminals doing desperate things. But I also understand that living in fear isn't living at all. I'd rather take the risk than spend my life looking over my shoulder. All right, Patterson gathered the documents. I'll have an answer by end of day. In the meantime, maintain your normal routine. Don't do anything that might alert Volkov that we're closing in. After the federal agents left, Emily sat alone in her conference room, feeling the weight of what she'd set in motion. Her phone buzzed a text from Vince. How did it go? They're considering it. Decision by tonight. Good. I have news too. Volkov's people just purchased airline tickets to Prague. Multiple first-class seats, departing tomorrow evening. He's running. Emily's stomach dropped. If he leaves the country, he becomes significantly harder to prosecute. European extradition takes months or years, assuming it happens at all. Another message followed. We need to force his hand. Make him stay. How? By threatening what he values most. His money and his reputation. I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. Emily called him instead of texting. Tell me. We leak the evidence. Not to the FBI, but to the press. Financial records, money laundering allegations, connections to organized crime. We make it public before Volkov can disappear. He'll be forced to stay and defend himself, which keeps him in FBI jurisdiction. That's insane, Emily said. We lose control of the narrative, we risk compromising Patterson's investigation, and we paint targets on our backs. We already have targets on our backs. And if Volkov runs, Patterson's investigation becomes moot. At least this way, we force action. Vince's voice was calm, rational, as if he were discussing stock options instead of exposing themselves to a criminal empire. I've already contacted a journalist I trust, someone who's been investigating Volkov for years but couldn't get enough evidence to publish. We give her everything. She runs it tomorrow morning. By the time Volkov sees it, he'll be too busy managing the fallout to flee the country. Emily walked to her office window, looking out at the city where she'd built her empire, the landscape that had seemed so solid and predictable just a month ago. This destroys my company's reputation. Titan Shield becomes the firm that was used for money laundering. Our stock crashes, our clients flee, everything I've built collapses. Or Titan Shield becomes the company that exposed the corruption and cooperated with authorities. You become the CEO who prioritized ethics over profit. It's a risk, but it's also an opportunity to rebuild on firmer ground. Emily closed her eyes, thinking of her employees, her investors, her own carefully constructed identity as an untouchable business leader. If I do this, I can't go back. Everything changes. Everything already changed the moment that knife came at you in the plaza. This just makes it official. He was right, Emily realized. The illusion of control had shattered that night. Now she was choosing whether to rebuild the same fragile structure or create something more honest, even if it was built on ruins. Give the journalist everything, Emily said, and tell Patterson what we're doing. She'll be furious, but at least she won't be surprised when the story breaks. Already on it. Vince's voice carried something that might have been pride. For what it's worth, Emily, you're braver than most people I've worked with in 30 years. I'm not brave. I'm terrified. That's what makes it bravery. The article appeared on the New York Times website at 6 a.m. the next morning, under the byline of investigative reporter Linda Chen. The headline was devastating. Tech CEO unknowingly facilitated billions in money laundering for organized crime syndicate. But the story wasn't just about Emily's unwitting involvement. Linda Chen had taken Vince's evidence and Emily's testimony and woven them into a comprehensive exposé of Anton Volkov's operations. The article detailed shell companies, real estate schemes, cryptocurrency manipulation, and political corruption. It named names, published documents, and included photographs that demonstrated decades of criminal activity hiding behind legitimate businesses. Emily's phone began ringing at 6:03 a.m. Her lawyers, her board members, investors, media outlets requesting comment. By 7, Titan Shield's stock had dropped 40% in pre-market trading. By 8, Emily's office was surrounded by reporters. She'd prepared a statement with Patterson's reluctant approval. The FBI had been furious about the leak, but recognized they had no choice except to move forward immediately. At 9 a.m., Emily stood before a packed press conference and delivered the most difficult speech of her career. "I stand before you today as the CEO of a company that was deceived and manipulated by criminal organizations," she said, her voice steady despite the cameras and the knowledge that Volkov was almost certainly watching. "I take full responsibility for failing to detect this corruption sooner. But I also want to be clear. From the moment I discovered the truth, I have worked with federal law enforcement to expose these operations and bring those responsible to justice." She detailed her cooperation with the FBI, her voluntary provision of evidence, and her commitment to cleaning Titan Shield of any remaining criminal influence. She announced the immediate termination of Daniel Pierce and Rebecca Morrison, the cancellation of the SecureNet acquisition, and a comprehensive third-party audit of all Titan Shield operations. "To our clients, our investors, and our employees, I apologize for this betrayal of trust, but I promise you that Titan Shield will emerge from this crisis stronger and more transparent than ever. And to those who thought they could use my company for criminal purposes, you underestimated my resolve. I will not rest until every person involved in this scheme faces justice." The questions that followed were brutal, but Emily had spent years handling hostile board meetings and skeptical investors. She answered with precision, admitted what she didn't know, and refused to speculate. By the time she left the podium, she'd transformed the narrative from corrupt CEO to whistleblower under siege. Patterson called as Emily returned to her office. "That was effective. More effective than I'd like. We're getting flooded with media requests and political pressure to move immediately. I'm activating the raids. We'll have teams hitting Volkov's locations within 2 hours. What about Vince? He's in protective custody at an undisclosed location, for his safety and ours." Patterson paused. "Miss Carter, you should consider joining him. Volkov's going to react, and we can't guarantee he won't target you before we bring him in. I'm not hiding in my own office." Emily looked at Marcus Chen, who stood by her door with 2 additional security personnel Vince had insisted she hire. "I have protection, and I have work to do. Hit Volkov hard enough that he's too busy to worry about revenge." The raids began at 11 a.m. Federal agents moved on Volkov's properties simultaneously: his Brighton Beach headquarters, the warehouse in Newark, the cryptocurrency exchange in Miami, the real estate offices in Boston. Emily watched the news coverage with grim satisfaction as reporters described the coordinated operation, the armored vehicles, the agents in tactical gear. But Volkov himself remained elusive. By noon, Patterson confirmed what Emily had feared. Volkov had vanished before the raids began. His house was empty, his usual locations abandoned. He'd seen the article, recognized the threat, and disappeared into whatever network of safe houses and escape routes he'd prepared for exactly this scenario. "He's still in the city," Vince told Emily during a secure call. "I have people watching the airports, the ports, the train stations. He didn't have time to get far. He's hunkered down somewhere, planning his next move, which will be probably eliminating everyone who can testify against him. Klaus Reinhardt, Daniel Pierce, Rebecca Morrison. They're all liabilities now. And you're the biggest liability of all." Emily looked out her window at the city she'd called home for 10 years, the landscape that suddenly felt full of threats. "Then he'll come for me. Yes, which is why I'm coming to you first." Vince arrived at Titan Shield's headquarters an hour later, moving through the building with Marcus's clearance and a team of people Emily recognized from the surveillance operation. They swept her office for devices, established a secure perimeter, and briefed Marcus on threat protocols. Emily found Vince in her conference room, studying the news coverage with the analytical focus she'd come to recognize. "You're supposed to be in protective custody." "I left." He turned from the screen. "Patterson wasn't pleased, but she doesn't have the authority to hold me, and I wasn't going to sit in a safe house while Volkov came after you. That's not your responsibility. I made it my responsibility the night I pulled you away from that knife." Vince walked closer, his expression serious. "Besides, you've become more than just an asset to protect. You've become—" He stopped, shook his head. "Never mind. You keep doing that." Starting to say something, then stopping. Emily felt her exhaustion mixing with something warmer, more dangerous. "Say what you're thinking." "I'm thinking that you're the first person in 20 years who's looked at me and seen something other than a criminal. I'm thinking that working with you has reminded me why I got into this life in the first place, to protect people, to maintain order, not just to accumulate power." He met her eyes. "And I'm thinking that when this is over, if we both survive, I want to know if that's mutual." Emily felt her carefully maintained professional distance crumbling. "Vince, you don't have to answer now. Hell, you don't have to answer at all. But I needed you to know, in case Volkov makes his move and I don't get another chance." Before Emily could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway. "We have a problem." Daniel Pierce just entered the building. Daniel moved through Titan Shield's lobby with the confidence of someone who still believed he belonged there. Security footage showed him badging through the turnstiles, smiling at the guards, heading for the elevators. He made it to the 35th floor before Marcus's team intercepted him. Emily watched the confrontation through security cameras, Vince standing beside her with his hand resting on a concealed weapon. Daniel looked genuinely confused when security blocked his path, his expression shifting from surprise to indignation. "I work here," he was saying. "Check the employee database. I'm VP of Operations." "You were terminated this morning," one of Marcus's team members replied. "You need to leave the building immediately." "This is ridiculous. Emily, I need to speak with Emily Carter. There's been a mistake." "The only mistake was trusting you," Emily said, stepping out of the stairwell where she'd descended to confront him directly. Vince followed, a shadow at her shoulder. Daniel's confusion melted into something harder when he saw them together. "So it's true. You've been working with Marino. Emily, do you have any idea what he is? What he does?" "I know exactly what he is, and I know exactly what you are." Emily nodded to Marcus, who held up a tablet displaying Daniel's communications with Volkov's people. "Every message, every betrayal, every piece of information you sold, it's all documented. The FBI has everything." The color drained from Daniel's face. "You don't understand. Volkov, he has leverage. He threatened my family. I didn't have a choice." "Everyone has choices." Emily kept her voice level. "You chose to sell me out instead of coming to me for help. You chose to put my life in danger to protect yourself. Those were your choices, Daniel. Now you get to live with the consequences." "Volkov will kill me," Daniel's voice cracked. "The moment he knows I've been compromised, he'll—" He looked at Vince. "You know what he'll do. You've been in this world long enough. Please, I'll cooperate with the FBI. I'll testify. I'll give them everything. Just protect me." Vince studied him with clinical detachment. "You had that option weeks ago. You could have come clean, sought witness protection, helped build the case. Instead, you kept feeding Volkov information, kept putting Emily at risk. You don't get to beg for protection now that your usefulness has expired." "Patterson is outside with agents," Emily said. "They'll take you into custody. What happens after that depends on how cooperative you are. But Daniel, we're done. Professionally, personally, in every way that matters. You're on your own." Patterson's team took Daniel away in handcuffs, his protests echoing through the lobby. Emily watched him go, feeling something close to pity mixed with disgust. He'd been her colleague, her lover, someone she'd trusted with her company and her confidence. That person had never really existed. "One down," Vince said quietly. "But Klaus and Rebecca are still out there, and so is Volkov." As if summoned by his name, Emily's phone rang. Unknown number. She glanced at Vince, who nodded, then answered on speaker. "Miss Carter." Volkov's voice was cultured, almost gentle, with a trace of Eastern European accent. "I've been watching your press conference. Very impressive performance. You have a gift for public relations. Who is this? Don't insult my intelligence. You know exactly who I am, just as I know exactly who you are, or rather, who you've become. The naive CEO who thought she could outmaneuver me. He paused. You've caused me significant trouble, Miss Carter. Frozen accounts, exposed operations, turned valuable assets into liabilities. That requires a response. The FBI is monitoring this call. Emily lied. Whatever you're planning. I'm planning your education. Volkov's voice hardened. You think you've won because you've made your accusations public? You've simply made yourself a target. My organization has survived far worse than an ambitious CEO and a traitor like Marino. We'll survive this too, but you won't. The line went dead. Vince was already moving, barking orders into his phone. He's making his move. Now. Everyone locked down. The explosion shattered Emily's office windows 47 floors above street level. The blast came from a shaped charge placed precisely to destroy Emily's office while leaving the rest of the floor intact. If Emily had been standing at her desk, she would have died instantly. Instead, she was in the conference room 30 feet away, separated by reinforced walls that Marcus had insisted on installing during the last security upgrade. The shockwave threw Emily against the far wall. Vince covered her body with his own as debris rained down glass, concrete, twisted metal. Fire alarms shrieked. Sprinklers activated, turning the air into a chaos of smoke and water. Move! Vince pulled Emily to her feet, checking her for injuries. Can you walk? Emily's ears rang. Her vision blurred, but nothing felt broken. Yes, go. They joined the evacuation flow. Marcus and his team surrounding them as hundreds of employees streamed toward the stairwells. 47 floors of descent, the crowd growing denser with each level. Vince kept Emily in the center of their formation, his body always positioned between her and potential threats. They emerged onto Lexington Avenue into a scene of controlled chaos. Fire trucks, police vehicles, news vans, EMTs triaging the wounded, reporters shouting questions. And standing across the street, partially obscured by the crowd, Emily saw a figure she recognized from surveillance photographs. Rebecca Morrison. Watching. Waiting. There. Emily grabbed Vince's arm and pointed. But Rebecca had already seen them. She turned and disappeared into the crowd, moving with practiced ease. Vince cursed and spoke rapidly into his phone, coordinating pursuit. She's heading south on Lex. Dark coat, blonde hair. Cut her off at 42nd. His team moved like a well-choreographed dance, peeling away from the crowd to intercept. But Rebecca had vanished into the subway station, lost in the afternoon commuters. Patterson arrived 20 minutes later, her expression grim. The explosive was C4, professionally placed, remotely detonated. Volkov's making his final moves before he runs. He's not running. Emily sat in the back of an ambulance, refusing treatment despite the EMT's protests. He's eliminating witnesses. Klaus, Daniel, Rebecca, me, anyone who can testify against him. Then we get you somewhere safe. Now. Patterson gestured to a pair of unmarked vehicles. Federal custody, secure location, no arguments. Emily looked at Vince, who nodded. She's right. You've done everything you can. Let Patterson finish it. And you? I'll find Volkov. He can't hide forever, and I know his world better than any federal agent. Vince's expression softened. But first, I make sure you're safe. They drove to a safe house in Westchester, a nondescript colonial that could have belonged to any upper-middle-class family. Patterson stationed agents at every entrance and assured Emily that Volkov couldn't penetrate their security. But as the sun set and Emily found herself in an anonymous bedroom with generic furniture, she felt the weight of everything collapse onto her. Her company was in chaos. Her office was destroyed. Her life had been compressed into a single carry-on bag of clothes someone had grabbed from her apartment. And somewhere in the city, Anton Volkov was planning his next move. Vince found her sitting on the bed, staring at her phone as if willpower alone could hold Titan Shield together. Patterson says you're not allowed to work. Security protocols. I built that company from nothing. I'm not going to watch it die because some criminal decided I was inconvenient. Emily looked up. You said you'd find Volkov. When? Tonight. I have people tracking his usual contacts, monitoring his properties. He'll surface eventually, they always do. And then what? You kill him? Add another body to your ledger? Vince sat beside her on the bed, close enough that she could feel his warmth. I do what's necessary to keep you alive. If that means killing Volkov, then yes. You want me to apologize for that? No. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. I want you to tell me if you meant what you said earlier. About seeing something other than a criminal when you look at me. About wanting to know if it's mutual. Emily, because I do see something else. I see someone who saved my life repeatedly without asking for anything in return. Someone who risked his organization and his freedom to help a stranger. Someone who's shown me more loyalty in a month than people I've known for years. She turned to face him. I see someone I shouldn't trust, but do anyway. And that terrifies me more than Volkov ever could. Vince studied her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. I've spent 20 years keeping people at a distance. It's safer that way, cleaner. But you. He reached up, touched her face with surprising gentleness. You make me want things I haven't wanted in decades. A life that isn't just survival and violence. A reason to walk away from this world I've built. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm choosing. His thumb traced her cheekbone. If we survive this, when we survive this, I'm out. I'll give Patterson everything she needs to dismantle my organization in exchange for immunity and a clean start. I'm done being the person who has to make impossible choices to stay alive. Emily leaned into his touch, feeling tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally surface. What if we can't have that? What if Volkov? Then we don't. But I'd rather die trying for something real than live another 20 years in the shadows. Vince pulled her close, and Emily let herself collapse against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her cheek. They stayed like that for a long time. Two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances, holding on like the world outside didn't exist. 3 months later, Emily stood in her new office, smaller than the destroyed space in the Lexington Tower, but with better light and a view of the Hudson River. Titan Shield had survived, barely, transformed by crisis into something leaner and more focused. Half the board had resigned. Most of the executive team had been replaced. The stock had stabilized at 60% of its former value. But the company was clean. Patterson's investigation had cleared Titan Shield of knowing involvement in Volkov's operations. The comprehensive audit Emily had commissioned found no other security breaches, and the publicity, while initially devastating, had eventually shifted to Emily's favor, the CEO who'd sacrificed her company's value to expose corruption. Anton Volkov had been arrested 2 weeks after the explosion, found in a warehouse in Newark by a joint FBI-NYPD task force. The details of his capture remained classified, but Emily suspected Vince's information had been crucial. Volkov was currently awaiting trial on 63 counts of money laundering, racketeering, attempted murder, and conspiracy. Klaus Reinhardt had died in a car accident in Switzerland, officially an accident, though Emily had her doubts. Rebecca Morrison had been arrested at JFK trying to board a flight to Berlin and had accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony against Volkov. Daniel Pierce remained in witness protection, his location unknown even to Emily, and Vince. Emily looked at the photograph on her desk, taken at a cafe in Greenwich Village 2 weeks ago. He looked different without the constant tension that had defined him during their crisis. Lighter somehow. Younger. He'd kept his promise. Full cooperation with the FBI in exchange for immunity and the dismantling of his organization. He'd walked away from the only life he'd known for 30 years, leaving the territory to be absorbed by other organizations or eliminated by law enforcement. Now he ran a security consulting firm, legitimate and boring and everything he'd never been. He'd moved into an apartment 3 blocks from Emily's new place in Brooklyn. They had dinner together most nights, navigating the strange terrain of a normal relationship after everything they'd survived. Emily's phone buzzed. A text from Vince. Still on for tonight? I'm making reservations at that Italian place you mentioned. She smiled and typed back. Wouldn't miss it. Pick me up at 7? Always. Emily looked out at the city, at the endless motion of lives being lived in all their complexity. She'd lost her corner office, her commanding market position, her reputation as an untouchable business prodigy. But she'd gained something harder to quantify: the knowledge that she could survive the worst thing that had ever happened to her and build something better from the ruins. Her company was smaller but stronger. Her life was less glamorous but more honest. And she'd found something she hadn't even known she was looking for: a partner who understood that real strength wasn't about never falling, but about getting back up when you did. The intercom buzzed. Miss Carter? The board's ready for you in conference room B. Emily gathered her notes and stood, catching her reflection in the window. Same woman, different life, better life. I'll be right there, she said, and walked toward whatever came next with her eyes wide open.